Who am I? Where am I? What am I going to do about it? Everybody lives someplace. You know, in globalist culture, everybody lives inside a television set. You live inside a McDonald's. Airports are the same all over the world. It's global monoculture. But we actually live in very distinct, unique places that are created by ecological factors. Land forms, watersheds, native plants and animals, climate, all very distinct, unique. Wherever you come from, you know this, and whether or not you actually participate in it is another thing. We're trying to get people to participate in it, to not only recognize it, but harmonize with it.
Interested in the notion of people being able to map the things that matter to them instead of maps being the kind of, I remember when I was in junior high school, they'd give us these blank maps and we had to fill in the names of the rivers and the highways and the towns and which towns had which manufacturing things. And nobody ever told us that those were company towns and what it was like to live in a company town. We just had names and things. And I was just interested in the notion of using maps to give people more control over their lives and their conceptions of their lives.
Way in the past, people made maps all the time. They traced them in the sand and they put sticks on the beach to talk about where a point was or where a whale was. They were just part of everyday life. And what's happened in the last, I don't know what it is, 50 or 100 years, is just like we've trusted doctors to take care of our bodies, and architects to build our houses, we've begun to think that only cartographers can make maps. Well, that's a breakthrough to know we're doing the three. If everyone's taking notes.
I always start by saying put X in the middle of the paper, that's where you live. Everybody can do that. And next, draw the water body that's nearest you, creek, lake, whatever. Then the hills and mountains that made the water go there, and then how people might live there in the future in a sustainable way. And that workshop, by the way, is people are gone. I mean, after the first couple of elements, they know that they're drawing the first bioregional map that's ever been drawn for where they live.
No, it's got to be back a bit. Absolutely. So the Agricultural Land Commission's happy, but we're not really getting any kind of different sort of residential development that's less car-oriented or less impact.
One of the goals of these maps is to capture an audience. You know, they're political maps with teeth, to talk about a sustainable alternative to a settlement pattern that isn't sustainable now.
The principal Planetdrome workshop is to talk to people about the difference between belonging to a nation and a state and belonging to a bioregion, and then helping them see where they live in bioregional terms by making a map. Well, a bioregion is a cultural idea of a place where you live in ecological terms. It's necessary to say it in a new way, bioregion, because since the industrial era, people have been so displaced from their natural surroundings that they don't have a sense of where the water comes from, what the soil is, where their food comes from. Even.
And they float the logs down the Harrison Lake. There's also a number of hot springs.
The colonialized part of the planet is the most dislocated. Australia, for example, almost all of the borders of the districts of Australia are straight lines. And that's the result of colonization. And think of, the straight lines in North America, the Canadian border with the U.S. that runs from the Great Lakes to the Pacific, probably the longest straight line on the planet, and defoliated every year by treaty arrangements so there can be clear sight for 100 yards across it in wilderness areas. It is insane.
I had gone to a graduate school in community and regional planning in Vancouver and had read lots of great books by Saul Alinsky and Lewis Mumford and had all the ideals down, a lot of enthusiasm, and then went to work in a very rural region in northwest British Columbia. And what happened is there was no way that those communities would accept my idealistic type of planning. There had to be some way to translate the ideas that I was interested in to the people who lived in place. And that's the type of maps that the bioregional mapping, the technique that I've worked on, help people to learn how to make. So you can make a map about the special places in your community. You can make a map about where the community grows its food. You can make maps that show environmental degradation. With a very simple technique, we try to make maps that look very official, that look like the maps that they make, that the government, that industry, that the military make, but tell a very different story.
He worked with people to map how their lives fitted into the landscapes rather than how land was owned or where roads went or the interests of the people who were in charge of the world, as it were.
One of the first projects I had as a planner in Terrace was to work on a regional resource map, which was a very expensive project that employed a famous cartographer, Lou Skoda. And the idea was for business interests to present the economic development opportunities for an 80,000 square mile chunk of British Columbia. So as we developed what story that map would tell, we changed the focus subtly so that it wasn't just about business. It was about whale migration routes, where birds migrated, where there were impoverished communities, where there were protected areas and special places. So this beautiful map, multicolored, cost thousands, was printed, and it was successful in terms of being attractive to the business community, but it also was popular with the community. So it showed up on the walls of gas stations up in near Telegraph Creek and in restaurants in the Skeena Valley, and people actually used this map to start to perceive about their home territory in a way that they'd never really seen before.
It was clear that people suddenly saw their own world in different terms, and they saw their own role as one of having effect on things. And that's the greatest gift you can give to anyone. So I think, yes, he didn't say specifically what happened, but there's no way that people can change that way and not have community change follow. It's got to have been.
When I start mapping, I look for features that are there in the forest that will tell you a little bit of something about what's going on. So this is a classic kind of feature, is an old log that's come down and it's just been left. And so that's an important thing to map, because this is where a lot goes on. In fact, they're really the life of the forest. So you got a whole sort of cycle of life occurring right here. So you'd map this little area here. We've been kind of, I've been sort of making little maps for years, but they didn't have any significance. Well, suddenly, people are starting to need them as, tools with land title and for future conservation. So part of what's driving a lot of this mapping now is the need to attach maps to land titles. And so they're becoming legal documents. Okay.
The changes, I believe, came in last year, and I'm aware of one particular property in the area where a covenant is about to be signed. He's a very elderly gentleman in his 90s, and for him this is an absolute breakthrough. Before now, he despaired of ever being able to preserve his land for posterity with old-growth trees and all that type of thing, and now at last he can do it.
Now, let's just go down there, and we'll just go so we can peek at the marshy area.
I
Then we'll walk
want to learn to map so that we can map the property in a way that can be recognized to be put with the deed when we put a covenant on, because some areas are to be kept pristine, like the bog and the Gary Oak Meadows, but then there are other areas which can be used for gardening and animals and stuff. And if you do this legal covenant, which is now permitted in BC, in conjunction with like the Nature Conservancy or some other group, it will continue after we're gone.
Well, I think what's going to happen, hopefully, is there will be a chain of properties all the way down the island, which will help to preserve old-growth forest in the area. There is a little bit left in this area, of course, along the waterfront. And I think basically to enhance the concept of controlled development.
Laws are changing. I think the way we view land is changing. What these trusts are doing is kind of responding to that need in communities. And they're looking at different tools to give to members of the community on how they express where special places are. So the mapping is really kind of taken on a life of its own.
Sometimes you don't need particularly a legal document. You might want to just create what they call a mental map of an area.
I am a psychologist, and I do a lot of work in what's called community building, or helping people get along together better and do things together, community inclusion, helping people with disabilities get together with members of the larger community, so building a better understanding. We do a lot of what's called social mapping and that kind of work, and this just seemed to tie in this physical mapping. So I was very curious about how it would tie in, and my mind is just reeling with all sorts of ideas.
You are the only people that can get that information on. It should be, because if it doesn't get on the official community plan, no one knows it's there, it gets destroyed. It's just...
I think it's a powerful tool, a very powerful tool that people can use in any fashion. Because really all it is finding a visual way to speak about the concerns you have about the land that you're walking on and how you see that land being used in your life and in the larger community.
I think by the very act of mapping, you're creating an awareness. You're seeing things in a different way. Most of us, we drive past on the way to work or whatever, and it's a blur. And if you stop to literally smell the roses and get down there on your hands and knees and examine the vegetation and make a list of everything you see, it's like any new hobby, painting or photography, that all of a sudden the way that you see things changes.
Bioregionalism recognizes that there isn't just one path of growth or development for a place. There's as many stories or visions of the future in any community as there are people that live there. And what bioregionalism, I think, addresses is the fact that we have to listen to each other's stories. It's no longer going to be a future driven by pure economic development. It's going to be a future driven by quality of life. Well, bioregionalism, I think, is powerful in ways that other social change movements aren't, for a number of reasons. And one of them is that it's inclusionary. What a lot of social change movements in the past were, that they did great work, the feminist movement, the environmental movement, the anti-war movement, anti-nuclear. You could go on and on. There's 20 some odd that I've identified. But they tended to travel in parallel paths. And they tended to have charismatic leaders. And they tended to invent jargon that isolated them from the wider public. And what bioregionalism has tried to do is learn from that. Organizations like the Planet Drum Foundation, which started with Peter Berg and Judy Goldhaft and others in 1973, have been a very steady clearinghouse, a source of information about what bioregionalism is.
Regarding one of the other projects, the stenciling project we've been working on with the San Francisco Department of Public Works, who supplies me with all of that paint, stencils, and gloves, and everything else we need. Last count, we've worked with about 5 schools this year altogether, and we've stenciled, I'd say, 300 or 400 stencils at least.
When we found out the Department of Public Works was having trouble with their program of stenciling on the sidewalks around storm drains, we pitched in and offered to make it one of the projects that we bring into schools. So we bring school children, 8, 9 years old, out to the curb, have them, they put blue paint on a stencil that says "Don't dump into the bay," and our Education Plus Action coordinator talks to them about watersheds and bioregions. It's really remarkable. It's one of my favorite projects. So then the kids go home, and tell their parents, "Did you know we live in a watershed and you're not supposed to throw oil in the bay?" And it's phenomenal. It's very difficult to talk about being part of natural systems to people who live in urban environments, especially inner cities. So we don't lead with the conceptual basis of Planet Drum when we talk to people in inner cities. We lead with how can you do something that would make you feel better, make the environment around you better. So, for example, the Senator Hotel was an example of our feeling that a rooftop garden there would be tremendously exemplary, that people would imitate it, and that if you could do a rooftop garden in the Tenderloin, a very hard-hit part of the city, you could do it anywhere.
It really was a chance for people who live in the same area to get together to work on something that made them actually proud to be living where they are. In that sense, it builds community. It's also just the very essence of getting people to work together to make a place that they live in a better place to be.
Coming up on the roof here, doing my yoga, doing my Tai Chi, doing gardening, I find a tremendous asset to me in my personal life. I might not look like it, but I haven't had a drink and drugs in 19 years, so as you can see, it works,
The effect of the Green City Project so far has been that 200 people a month for the last 3 years have become involved volunteering with different groups, which meant the other groups are now getting an idea that they're all involved with the same thing, the same general effort, which we call urban sustainability. Urban sustainability doesn't mean keeping cities the way they are and avoiding having them become worse. Urban sustainability should mean having a really sustainable urban environment that can go into the future for planning of at least 50 or 100 years. And that would mean that to a large extent, the way people think of living in the city has to be restructured.
Can you get under there? So this is a map of the downtown east side, one of the many kinds of maps that the city makes. And with the bioregional mapping, what you do is you go to a large format Xerox machine and you make a whole bunch of copies of this map. And then you do two different sets of maps. One is about the environment, where the shoreline is, what type of wild animals are here, where the creeks used to be that flowed through here. So you do a whole series of maps that talk about the environment. And the next thing you do is you do a whole series of maps that talk about the people that live here and the history of this place. So one map could be about the heritage buildings. Where's all the special buildings that the community wants to preserve? And the other could be about safety issues. Where are the pawn shops? Where are the unsafe alleys? Where are the boarded up derelict buildings? If you do bioregional mapping and you build a series of maps around a kitchen table with very simple tools that talk about the biophysical and the cultural identity of place, and you do this for under $1,000, and you create an extraordinarily powerful series of visual images about your home. On one level, you've just created a series of maps. But on another level, you've empowered people to do what they've entrusted others to do historically. And the other thing you do, which virtually no planning process does, is you come in and you talk to the people of the community because they know the most about this place. What's good about it, what's bad about it, where the challenges are, where the opportunities are. there's a new view of how the world works, a new paradigm. And this paradigm is about the fact that really, when you do research, you go to listen to people's stories. And people will have very different stories about who they are, what they consider their history to be, what their aspirations for the future are. And what researchers and planning professionals, designers can do is help people to translate those stories so that people that maybe never listen to each other can come together.
But the thing is, in terms of what they're going to do up here, that's going to really influence us. So we want say over all that development up there.
Even though in our deeper past, everyone was a map maker. In our Celtic culture, for instance, people knew the legends and the language. We don't know that anymore. And many, many cultures have been stripped of that knowledge. And I think map making is one of those types of knowledge. So what bioregional mapping does is try to bring the language of maps, the visual language of place, back into the everyday life of everyday people.
I put the symbol of spiritual power on where the Carnegie Center is.
They don't have to be perfect. They'll never be perfect. The story that a map tells is only an instant in time. And you can always make another map to tell another part of the story. And because of that, the map is almost like a utensil. You can put your coffee cup on it. You can pin it on the wall multiple times. You can draw in a place where something is wrong or something's missed. So the map is alive. It's never finished, and it's a part of everyday life.
This is what the downtown residents call Lake Pender. As you can see, it's pretty much like a lake. And there's ducks in it, and all the wildlife, algae, everything growing in it. But this place, right here, was supposed to be phase 2 of International Village.
We don't really need the pawn shops. I mean, we need more housing down here than the pawn shops, really.
So if you put a sticker for every pawn shop, you'd cover a map?
Cover the map, yeah. And then you're going to cover the one area, right the corner of Main and Hastings. It's going to be all whatever color we choose. It's going to be right in that area there.
But you see how talking about that is one thing. To show 45 stickers on a map, that would look great in the newspaper. It tends to focus the issue in a way that you can't.
And the number of bars, 80% of the drinking seats are down the downtown east side. So and then they condemn us, when people drink. I've just been marking on this map places where women have been killed and where women have been attacked in the downtown east side, because there have been over 118 women killed in the downtown east side over the last few years.
A lot of our women in the downtown east side who have died in the alleyways, due to a lot of the johns that they pick up. They end up coming into the alleyways, and sometimes that they don't want to pay them, and then they end up beating them up, and so when they beat them up, they leave them for dead.
Maps have power, and this map means that you don't exist.
That's correct.
So this is, for a developer, this is a powerful map. So you have to make up maps that are equally powerful, but from your perspective. Bioregionalism and bioregional mapping allow the identity of a place to be almost reconstructed. If you go out into libraries and government offices, in the memories of people who have lived in a community and maybe moved away, if you go to these places and search out the information about your home place and bring that information back together, you're creating from many separated pieces an identity of a place that otherwise will never be constructed. No government will do that. It's up to the people of that place to go out and make that search and bring that information home and use it for the creation of a sustainable future for that place.